Hello, welcome to this video discussing the subject of Blue Open Studio communicating to controllers running the CoDeSys system. In the third part of this series, we're going to take a deeper dive into how Blue Open Studio is supporting structures and arrays that exist within your CoDeSys controller system. We'll also discuss what the differences are between using tag integration and or driver sheets in your Blue Open Studio project to communicate to your CoDeSys controller. Okay, moving on. Like the first two parts, the agenda is basically the same. We're going to do a little review about the basics. We're going to go into the CoDeSys environment and look at what I created in there to show this functionality and discuss that. And then we will go into the Blue Open Studio environment and do some things. And while all this is happening, this is basically all happening with live communications going on. Okay, so again, in summary, I'm not going to do the top part. I've done that. I have done that in the first two parts, and you're free to pause and review that. But here in part three, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how Blue Open Studio supports one in multi-dimensional arrays. We're going to talk about how Blue Open Studio supports structures. We're going to talk about how it supports structures within structures. So you could call that, say, nested classes, for example. And then we can talk about arrays of nested structures. Okay. And then a couple of, and then just a note here in Blue Open Studio, a class is the terminology for the structure from CoDeSys. So they're interchangeable terms, but they mean the same thing, especially in light of what we're talking about for Blue Open Studio. And then, like I said, we'll get in a little bit about, excuse me, tag integration versus a driver sheet. And then we'll discuss the ways that we can actually index ourselves through arrays, structures, and even multi-dimensional structures to some extent. Okay, so first we'll go to our CoDeSys environment and look at what I've created in there to, like I said, to show how we support this. All right, so here we are in my CoDeSys environment. This happens to be Machine Expert for the Schneider CoDeSys-based PLCs. And what you can see here is I'm connected to this controller currently. And what you can see here is I've created some structures, which again, in Blue Open Studio, this is what's known as classes. And if you look at these structures, you notice some of them are simple, or some of them are nested, for example. So this first one right off the bat, so this is a what we would call a nested structure. So this is a data type that is a unique instance of another data type, which is this heating source. Oops, let's open up that, and you can see in the heating source, this is just, I've created what that heating source structure looks like, etc. And I've kind of done that all the way down the line here. So if you look at what that looks like when we look at the global, and I made these all global, it put these all in the global variable list. And what you can see is when we break these out, here I've just got a simple Boolean variable here. Here I've got a simple 100 wide simple integer array, just one dimension. Here I've got a two-dimensional array. I don't remember, I think, yeah, I made it 50 and 50. Okay. Here is a array of a class. Right, so I have my work cells where I have embedded different other classes in it, right? So work cells, mixers, cookers, shredders, etc. Within cookers, then I have another heating source. So you can see basically what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to create an environment where I've got a mix of stuff that's nested, a couple levels deep, and then a two-dimensional array, and then just some simple flat stuff. So for example, here is just the instance of a motor, right? So I'm just using this as just an instance of that motor class. Here is an array of that motor class, like this, etc., and then a couple of new variables at the end. And then what you can see is I have pre-populated some values into these different variables. Just as an example, like, okay, I didn't I'll write some values into there when we get to that part in Blue Open Studio. Here you can see in the work cells, in the cookers, for example, I have also pre-populated some values that should be there. Yeah, okay. Same thing. Okay, maybe did I do it for the motors? Yep. I have some of these motors that I've pre-populated with some values also. Okay. All right, so now what we'll do is we'll switch over to the Blue Open Studio environment to show you. And the first thing we'll do is I'm just going to go into Blue Open Studio and we'll look at what it looks like to live browse this PLC. Okay, so here we are in the Blue Open Studio environment. And what I'm going to do and what I'm doing in this project is we're actually using a feature that allows me to basically live browse the tags in the controller actively while I'm developing the project. And then, the way that looks is it's basically done, that's configured under the tag integration feature. Okay, so if you go ahead and look in here and look at how I've got that configured, what you can see here is I've just basically put in the address. I'm just using node name as a connection scheme here. So I've got basically the node name of the PLC and really nothing else. You could see here I'm not using a offline file. If you wanted to use an offline file, this is where you would use the XML that's generated, and that does absolutely need to be generated for you to talk to this controller. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. It's going to tell me it's going to take some time, and that is one thing to note about the live tag browsing is it is a little, I'm going to say, touchy. It does work, but it can take a little bit of time to kind of get it to refresh in the tags for whatever reason. Okay, so I'm just going to, like, for example, here, I think I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now what happens is when I go ahead and look at a screen, you'll see I've created some objects here already. And for example, so now if I go into this text box, here's my existing tag expression. So that's just that is from the DEV is the prefix that tells me that it's from tag integration. And then the rest of this is pretty much matching the tag name that exists in the PLC. So application.gbl for the global variable list, and then the int array global tag name with the array position. So now if I go ahead and browse into here, what I should see, so I know if I go down here into devices, you'll see my devices. Okay. And so now what it's actually doing is actively, so if you come down here and look at what it says down here, the data from the source is coming from the cache, the source data is being loaded. So that's what it's actually doing right now. One thing to note is it will, so for example, if you're having connection problems, so if you literally can't connect, but you have connected before, be careful because it will eventually load from a cache. So you can be, so make sure that you're looking at, so if you see any anomalies in your data, like, okay, maybe this is from an old, from an old tag list, for example, be a little bit careful on that. The other thing that you can do is you can kind of get it to kind of wake up, so to speak, by hitting this refresh devices, and you'll notice things like this will pop up. And I'm just going to let this thing kind of roll on its own here for a while. And so let me go ahead. I'm gonna pause the video while this thing is kind of not behaving. So here, let's see what we can get. Okay, here we go. Getting it to expand. Okay, so here you can see now. Here's my global variable list. All right, and what you'll see when I click on the global variable list, you'll notice that here's everything that's kind of root to the global variable list. You'll notice the arrays are populated with a they look like, basically when I click on them, they look like this. And the first indicator when we talk about whenever we get into anything having to do with uh, indexing, this is one thing that we're going to look at here. Is one thing to note is when you actually have when it's showing you a position in an array like that, or with a question mark, that means that you can effectively index that array position through this list, for example. Okay, so that's what it looks like in the flat part. So then if we go into the two-dimensional array, what you'll notice is now I can index, but I can only index to the basically the lowest level of the array. The rest of the array is going to be a fixed position like that. Okay, and then again, if I go into my nested work cells, and it's got to go ahead and read that up. Give it a second. Through the magic of video editing, I will probably speed some of this up. See, I'm not sure. That's what I mean. It ultimately will work. It's just for whatever reason, it just takes a few seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. This is not. I'm going to go ahead until we can get this thing alive. Okay, so now you can see I've got the work cells array expanded, and you can see I've got inside these work cells, I've got cookers. I've got another class, and here's my cookers. Okay, we're going to give it some more time. Okay, it's expanded. Cookers, heating source cooker. Now it's breaking out this. And what you can see is now that because this array is nested inside this class, what you'll notice here is that this is not going to be indexable when you are using tag integration. Okay, so that's just one of the main points that I wanted to make. Okay. Okay, so that's essentially what the Blue Open Studio system looks like when you do tag integration. Basically, what you're doing, and this is regardless of whether you're doing live browsing or whether you're using, you're linking to the XML file. Essentially, what you're doing is as you're making your development, as you go into the different objects and the different functions, when you actually get to the point where you're browsing for the tags, you're basically literally going into this cached tag list and manually selecting the tag. Okay, for example here, and I would go up to index and I would pick whatever index I want and I would add it in here. Okay, and what you'll notice is what happens is one thing that's interesting here is notice what happens with my tag count down here. Okay, so right now I have 203 tags, even though all I've really brought in is these 4 different objects. And the reason that is that when you use tag integration, is a key point is that when you are bringing in even one element of a structure or an array, you effectively import the entire element into your tag count. So be aware of that. So that is one reason why, when we talk about tag integration versus using driver sheets. And remember, in Blue Open Studio, you can use a combination of both. So in this case, if I wanted to add driver sheets to this project and use driver sheets simultaneously with tag integration, it's okay. But that is one thing that you can do when you use driver sheets is you have more control over what you're going to do as far as your tag count. So say in this big global array, say if it's 1,000 deep array, for example, I don't necessarily need to get at all 1,000 elements. With tag integration, if I even need to get at 10 elements, it's going to consume 1,000 tags. When I do it in a driver sheet, if I only need 10 elements, I will only consume 10 tags. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like when we use a driver sheet. Okay, so here we are in my project where I'm utilizing a driver sheet. And what you can see is what I've done here now in the driver sheet is you can see here's my bool tag, right? Very simple, right? So in this case, what we're actually doing is we're basically essentially binding this Blue Open Studio tag name to a physical I/O address, which is matching the tag name in the PLC. And then the station number is telling us where to get that data, right? So you could see, for example, this integer array in the PLC is 100 words large. I don't need to get at all 100. So in this case, what I can do is I can just simply create tags for 16 of those array positions, for example. And these don't have to be consecutive. These can be scattered throughout the array. It doesn't really matter. And then that has no bearing on these names. Again, these index numbers don't necessarily need to match. Obviously, I, you wouldn't drive somebody crazy if you didn't match them, but because they're two different tags, so to speak. This is a Blue Open Studio tag, and then this is the tag that exists in the PLC. And again, you can see the same thing when I am indexing my way through a two-dimensional array. Effectively, with driver sheets, you can effectively index your way through both dimensions of the array. You're kind of fooling it in a way is you're using the one-dimensional capability in Blue Open Studio, and then you're just referencing different points in that array to the individual points in the PLC, right? Because you're selectively saying this is where I'm going to get that data from directly. Okay, and you can see again here's same thing for these elements in the stuff that I couldn't necessarily index through in tag integration. Now I have the ability to do it. Okay, and then here same thing with the motor classes, etc. Okay, so let's take a look at what I did in this project. We can kind of actively see, just kind of give you an example of what we're doing here, so you can kind of see here's the different data that I have in that simple flat one-dimensional array. You can see my pointer right now is 0, so I'm getting the data from position 0. If I change this pointer to 1, then I'll get the data from position 1, etc. If I change the pointer to 11, then I'll get the data from position 11. Okay, same thing if I come down here. Here's my cookers, right? Here's my pointer. As I index my way through here, I can get a different value into my indexed data display. And I kind of show you a sort of more world example. Here's my fixed motor position, right? Here's my speed, here's my temperature. And now what I have is in this case, what I've got is I'm indexing my way through this motor, right? So this is motor number 0. There's its speed, there's its temperature, here's motor 1, etc. This motor is off, this motor is on, this motor is off, this motor is on, and then I can back my way through the different motor numbers. Okay, so what that looks like in the actual project then is if I go in here and if I look in the project and if I look at this linked symbol, basically what you can see, what I've done here is, okay, so what I have is I've got the tag, and then I've got this being indexed by this motor index. This is just an integer variable that I'm using to step my way through the different indexes in the array. Okay. Okay, so in summary, just to kind of tie this all together before I conclude the video, Blue Open Studio is supporting single dimension arrays in non-nested structures natively, and this can be fully indexed. So if you're planning a project, it's typically better if you know you're going to be using Blue Open Studio, it has its HMI SCADA. It's if you can stick with one-dimension arrays and just non-nested structures. That's the best way to make Blue Open Studio more compatible with your system. Hopefully this will change in the future. We're looking forward to that, be able to support that in a better way in the future. Driver sheets are allowing you more refined control over your tag count, right? So this is what we talked about. So example, if I got an array size with 6 elements, in the structure times 1,000 array positions, that's going to give me 6,000 tags to use in BOS. So if I'm using tag integration, if I import any single element of that, I'm going to get 6,000 tags. Okay. This is going to allow me full indexing of the array while only selecting an element once, but it's going to consume 6,000 tags. With the driver sheets, and again, like I showed, you can get down to the individual elements to limit the tag count. Okay. And then basically what that also means is you can only really index to the tags in the driver sheet. If the element does not have a tag, it cannot be indexed to, so to speak. Okay. All right. With tag integration, one dimension and first level nested elements can be indexed. Okay. And then live browsing, like we showed, needs a little bit of time to refresh. Like I said, be careful. Make sure you're not looking at old values that might have been cached. Okay. And then one other little side note is when you do, what's interesting is when you do use tag integration and you do bring in a structure slash class into Blue Open Studio, it will actually create a corresponding structure in Blue Open Studio as if you created it on your own. Okay. So hopefully this is useful. I will be posting that as a sample project on Proface HMI Design Studio. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.